We'll call the workshop to order at 1 o'clock. Thank everybody for attending and thank all the visitors we have. We do have public comments for later in the meeting. Agenda item number 2, discussion regarding annual statutory training required by Texas Occupations Code 1101.059, including an overview of Robert's rules. And we will turn it over to Vanessa and Abby.
Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to your November annual statutory training.
Couldn't wait.
Great.
Yeah, couldn't wait for it.
Yeah.
We're actually going to cover some of the stuff that we tend to cover every year. We won't do a prolonged training. You do have the most recent version of the commission guide. We sent you that. I think it went on Chelsea's message on Friday. And I think there's an acknowledgement form.
Done. All
Done.
nine
All
are
done.
signed.
Wow, that's great.
Well done.
Um,
Time to go home.
Yes, then the training is over. No, but I want to note that commission guide has updated links for everything. So there's quite a number of references in there. It's a really good document to have if you're like, wait, I can't remember who does what or what is where. And you can find that on the website under the About the Commission page, the one where all your pictures are. There's a link to that guide. So it's a good reference tool. We're going to talk about the Open Meetings Act, my favorite. Abby's going to give a presentation on Robert's Rules of Order. That's something that Commissioner Hargraves requested. We did it a few years back, and it's always a great one just to walk through for purposes of when you all are having meetings and who does what and what happens with the motion, et cetera. And then we've got an interesting, it was a little bit of a video towards the end, but it's talking about agency authority. And we received some, we were calling it guidance, but it was over the course of a sunset committee or sunset commission meeting where we attended as part of our limited scope review, but they were actually talking to and about another agency. And there was just a really great clip in there that we think is relevant to all state agencies. So we wanted to share it with you. We'll also be sharing that with all of the advisory committees this year, and you'll see why. Okay. So the Open Meetings Act. Open Meetings Act is intended to keep the governmental decision-making process done by the full commission open to the public, right? That's why we have open meetings. And that's so that the public can see what is going on with, with the government, what decisions the government is making. And that's required to be done in situations like this, where you've got a 9-person commission that's making policy decisions that impact license holders, the consumer, the industry as a whole. Those decisions are made in public meetings like the one we just had. And so there are a number of Open Meetings Act requirements that must be met whenever there is a commission meeting or any of our open meetings. Our advisory committee meetings are all considered to be open meetings. And these are the things that you probably don't see, but maybe you've picked up the pattern of when you receive certain your materials and things like that. So there's posting requirements. So we've got to post the agenda. Amber takes care of that. Prior to the agenda being posted, there is a lengthy process of deciding what's on that agenda. It's typically informed by past agendas, right? So you see things like the division director reports, any rules that were up for proposal, they're now going to fall under the adopted category, contested cases, things like that. And then we fill in some of the other new stuff depending on the timing of things and when there's things that are up for discussion. The one I think of that you see in May and August budget, right? Or any of the audits that are reported on, things like that. So the agendas are approved by the chair. Then we've also got our minutes. So we do those video minutes, as I think you've all seen. I think they're very helpful. They've also got a written note of what happened under the agenda item. And those minutes are approved by the secretary of the commission. And so I think that's a part of the job that people don't always remember. But that is an important part. And so that's sort of I think of that as like the behind the scenes of open meeting, right?
Vanessa, quick question. So I forgot my badge, so I had to go into the front where the front desk lady is. If it's an open meeting, why does she ask for my name and verify who I am?
I think that's our building security
No, who's in the
entrance
building?
process to know who's in the building. In the event there's a fire, in the event there's anything that comes up, that TREC actually runs that. That's used to be done by an actual DPS officer. There's still a DPS officer that sits down there, but it's just so we know who's in the building, who's leaving the building. It's not really tied to open meetings so much. I mean, anyone is welcome. They just have to go through that.
Sign in, so it's like
Yeah.
a sign in process.
Right, that's right. All right. Every year this happens to me.
Present.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I'm just gonna pretend like I'm doing it, and then Abby will know when to switch it. So quorum, we talk about this a lot. Quorum, when there's the full 9, is 5, which is always a really easy number to remember, right? 5. So that's when you have a majority of the commission present. Really easy when you think about it in terms of we're all sitting in here today and we can see, we've got 9, but 5 is the point where you have a majority, and that's when these open meetings laws are going to really kick in for the purposes of the Open Meetings Act. And a quorum is not bad. I mean, we talk a lot about the dangers of a walking quorum and of discussing official business, sort of somewhat off the record in terms of, I go to Commissioner Woodruff and I say, I think in this PFD we need to do X, Y, and Z. And then I go to Commissioner Russell and I'm like, I think in this PFD, and I'm a commissioner in this scenario. And I've talked to enough people that all of a sudden I'm discussing official commission business, right? Which is that decision-making process in terms of the PFDs that have gone to SOA. And I'm doing that outside of a meeting. If I've talked to 5 or more, I am acting outside of open meetings laws, which is not a good thing. But a quorum isn't always a bad thing, right? Because we need a quorum to hold our meeting. And so that's what allows us in an open meeting. All of your meetings are open. This meeting is open, as you can see. We usually think of the one downstairs, but this is an open meeting. Same rules, same requirements, etc. Minutes. We post the agenda within the time frame. But
In fact, one of our rules in an open meeting is that this door has to remain open so the public can come and go. So at some point during this meeting, there will be a noisy group of people who walk by, and then someone will try to close that door every time, and we'll have to open it again because that's part of an open meeting.
Why are you looking at me when you?
Oh, you're by the door. I'm so sorry, Lee.
So Lee will be.
Points.
Yeah, I mean, the other day, I think I was virtual for this meeting, but we had a dog run in. And that's exciting. I don't know that I've seen
Never
that
happened before.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about unlawful quorums, walking quorums, and you guys know this. It was in your training that you did originally. It's in the book. This is really just a high level walkthrough of it. So if you've got 5 or more commissioners deliberating outside of a properly called upon meeting, this can come up indirectly too with that scenario that I was telling you about, where if you're just sort of individually reaching out and discussing commission decisions, business. And then the one thing we do always remind everyone of is, be cautious with pre-meeting chatter or hotel breakfast or dinner. Just, you don't want to have 5, right? That's also a terrible dinner reservation for 5, right? You're not going to get in anywhere. But in all seriousness, even you want to make sure that this commission is in compliance with open meetings and that there's no one who will call that into question, right? So, I heard some of the commissioners before the meeting, they were talking about the contested case that I'm a part of, and it seemed like they'd already made up their minds and they were discussing it. And sometimes it could be a simple, and I think a long time ago, there was actually someone who's like, they were all at breakfast together, right? And that might be true because a lot of you stay at the same hotel, right? So those are just the things that you want to be mindful of, is even just the optics of it. But certainly not in terms of substantive discussion. I think pre-meeting discussion is probably where you've got I'd say the most risk because it's fresh in your minds, right? And two, you definitely got folks that are watching, and we want to make sure that we are following open meetings laws because they are all about transparency in government. And that is fundamental to this agency and certainly to the work that the 9 commissioners do.
The challenge with the walking forum is that if you have a conversation with one person, you don't know who else that one person has spoken to. And if the walking quorum means that 5 have contributed to that collective conversation, you might not know there was a walking quorum, which is the reason why just the avoiding topics on the agenda is your better scenario. It's not, sometimes you need to coordinate with the chair or something like that, but you only know of the conversations you're a part of, right?
And there's, I won't go through it, but there sure are a lot of cases about open meetings violations, and your 2 GCs work hard to make sure we're in compliance, and make sure that you all understand these laws, and make sure if the agenda is not specific enough, if it's not posted at the right time, all of those things start factoring in. We take the same amount of care with all of our advisory committee meetings as well. Okay. Pretend to push the button. Okay. This is one, speaking of committees. If you can let Chelsea or myself know, or Abby, if you plan on sitting in, and you're not one of the committee's official liaisons, because we always factor our liaisons into our commissioner count. That's really important because as much as we love having commissioner engagement in those meetings, it can lead to an unintended quorum. And I think in my time here, we got real close one time, but somebody dialed off before anything actually happened. The great news is, though, we do those videos and we've got the video minutes up. I always love to talk about video minutes. But that means that you don't have to miss the meeting, right? You can go back and hear the conversation. It doesn't mean if you're not a liaison, you shouldn't attend. Just let us know so that we know how many folks are going to be there from the commission. Okay. Click. Commission committees. This is exciting. Typically not a quorum, right? Should never be a quorum. And that's why we are able to, those aren't open meetings, right? Because you don't, you've got no quorum. They're having this discussion. They're going to make recommendations to the full commission unless something has been specifically delegated to them.
It's typically 3.
3, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said 4 just then. 3, and it's, that's where you think about your enforcement committee, your executive committee. The other one that I think of that doesn't immediately come to mind are those selection committees for the appointments to advisory committees, right? So that's an area where that selection committee is typically of 3. They can email back and forth about, oh, I think this person would be great, but I'm not sure. Should we do an interview here? What should we, that kind of stuff. That's all okay. But remember, walking quorum. So if you're on one of those selection committees, it's not the time to reach out to 2, 3 other commissioners to be like, hey, what do you think of Vanessa on that committee? Do you think that's someone we would want to put on that committee, or should, she not really been around that long? Do we want to wait? That kind of thing. That's where you can start to get that walking quorum, is like seeking the input of other commissioners and getting that inadvertent quorum. Okay. And I think we always try and let you know during selection committee process, you can feel free. We've had some emails actually back and forth this last round. And that's okay. That's where it's okay. Okay, next, click. Okay, so summary, so 5, right? Deliberations can occur in person, on the phone, in chat, and in email. And those are things that sometimes you don't think about, right? Because we think about being in a meeting in person, talking to someone in person before a meeting, but just remember, that's that, you know, whenever I send you an email, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, I BCC all of the commissioners, and that is so there's not a reply all scenario, which can be done by mistake, or sometimes people don't remember that they can't talk about stuff in that meeting. So I always put that as a BCC for that purpose. I deal with the advisory committees as well. But that's just a reminder. They can happen in chat, they can happen in text, you know, sort of pick your communication poison on that. And then walking quorums, which I think we've discussed here. If you ever have a question on open meetings, please feel free to reach out to either me or Abby. We're real big nerds when it comes to open meetings, open government, public information. I mean, the stuff that I know everyone is excited to talk about. But truly, please do ask us a question, come to us, just say, hey, I'm not sure if it's this. It's always better to hear the, I'm not sure if this would be a violation, then I think I may have committed a violation. But those are also okay. Just come and talk to us. And hopefully you feel confident in this process and in the purpose behind it, which is, and they call these sunshine laws nationally. It's really so that the public knows what the government is doing, right? We work for the public. And that's a really important foundation in state government. And I think at this agency, folks seem really committed to it. And I appreciate that. I don't know if that's always the case, but I know it's the case. Okay.
You Robert's rules?
Yes. You want to pretend
I'll stand right here. I don't trust.
you should.
Okay. So we're gonna just briefly touch on Robert's rules, really in 2 areas. The first is making and amending a motion, and then the second is elections. And why? This is the area, or these are the areas rather, where Robert's rules really impact you the most. The other reason is that we have a rule that says, aside from the contested case procedures, our meetings are to be conducted in accordance with Robert's rules. So as you saw today, the contested case hearings are similar to Robert's rules, but a little bit different. And so those are handled actually by another rule, but for everything else, it's Robert's rules. Okay. So how to make a motion, and this is pretty basic. I know most of you are really familiar with this, especially if you're involved in the association world. But a motion really consists of a couple of different parts. And a motion is really how the business of any body occurs. So you've got to have a motion in order to take formal action on it. So this is, again, just a motion that we made up, but I move that the commission approve the policy as written. That's your motion. And typically motions will have the word move, so moved, have that language so that everyone's clear what the motion is. You've always got to have a second for a motion, so someone has to second it. And then after the motion and the second, then the chair states the question. And this is for a couple purposes. One is to ensure that everyone is clear on what the actual motion was. Sometimes, especially if it's a longer motion, that can get kind of confused. Different motions happening, that can be confusing. So it's to alert everyone what the actual motion is. And then to hand it over to the body to discuss. And so that's an important point to make whenever we're talking about Robert's rules is sometimes, and it's really easy to do, you know, a motion is made and someone wants to ask a question or have some discussion, you know, before a second, for instance, or even before a motion is made. And technically under Robert's rules, you really are not supposed to open that discussion until you have a motion and a second. As with everything with Robert's rules, things can be relaxed depending on the setting. So, you know, sometimes you don't have to be strictly sticking exactly with what the rules say, but that's the ordinary process. So the chair states the question, we have a motion and a second to approve the policy as written. At that point, you discuss the motion, and then after there's sufficient discussion, there's a vote. And you do have to ask for all those in favor. You do have to ask all those against, with some limited exception. Generally, you always have to ask those in favor and those against. I know we got a question a couple years ago about abstentions. That's not something you have to ask under Robert's rules, but depending on the optics of something, you might want to, or someone might want to say that they're abstaining. So that can happen too. But really, you've got to ask for those in favor, those. So that's your basic motion format, the skeleton. How to amend a motion? I'm going to go through this, but I really think one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is that it's often easier to just let a motion die than to try to amend the motion. Because when you amend the motion, that motion to amend takes precedence over the underlying motion. And so you have to deal with that first. You have to vote on that first before you can even deal with the underlying motion. And that can get confusing, especially if you're doing multiple things with that motion to amend. So that's just been my experience. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way, but just that sometimes it's just easier to vote against the underlying motion than try to amend it in the moment. So how to amend a motion formally is before the motion's voted on, you're discussing the motion and someone wishes to change it. So they say something like, I move to amend the motion on the floor by inserting after the word written the phrase, except for section 2, which shall be struck from the policy. Then you need, just like any motion, you need a second for that motion. And then after the motion has been seconded, same process. This is just like any other motion, except it's going to take precedence. So the chair repeats the question. And so after discussion, a vote is taken. So if, let's say that this motion passed, that doesn't mean the underlying motion passed. It just means that everyone agreed to amend the underlying motion. So you have to first vote on the motion to amend and then the original motion. So again, that's the process, but depending on the complexity of the motion, again, sometimes it's easier to just let it die if there's not enough support. And okay, so those are motions. I went through that really quickly. The second area where you'll really rely on Robert's rules is for elections, which is coming up. So there's a lot of different ways you'll see to have nominations, and there's lots of different ways under Robert's rules to conduct an election. But traditionally what we have done is we've made nominations, the commission has made nominations from the floor. So it means it's open to anyone can nominate themselves, they can nominate someone else. There's not a formal procedure. There's other ways that nominations can happen. That can be through the chair, that can be by committee, that can be by ballot, lots of different ways. But traditionally we've done it from the floor, so it's open. And as I mentioned, they don't have to be seconded, although you certainly can second it if you want to show support, but you don't have to. And you can nominate yourself. And then once the nominations stop, the chair decides or declares that the nominations are closed. It says something like, hearing no further nominations for the position of the chair are closed. And so depending on how many openings you have, you'll go through that process. So we have vice chair and secretary open. So once those nominations are closed, then you move to elections. And so traditionally, again, there's lots of different ways you can do the elections. And in like the association world or nonprofit world, a lot of times that's dictated by bylaws or policies and procedures about how you do that. Traditionally, we've done it by a voice vote, where a vote is taken on each nominee in the order in which they were nominated. How it works with our process traditionally is you open the voting, you ask for the vote for that particular candidate, and if a majority is reached, you stop. That person has won. You don't have to go through the remaining nominated candidates. And so you go on until you get a majority. That might be it. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. I think that's all. Is there any questions about any of that? Okay, great.
Just on the abstaining, there's been times in the past where we've had a licensee appearing before us and they have a relationship with one of the commissioners. I think it's important on the record for them to say, I did abstain, especially if you go back and look at the tape and you don't see. I mean, so I remember we had one time, I think 2 commissioners or 3 abstained because they had, and that's,
Yeah, and from that's a great point. And from I think a Robert's Rules perspective, there's a difference between recusing yourself, which you would do up front, and abstaining.
Okay.
So if you're recusing, you're not even involved in that. But yeah, good point.
What's the difference?
Well, I don't think recusal is really contemplated under Robert's Rules. Recusal is under, I don't
State law.
State law. Yeah, when you have an interest. Yeah, when you
So
have
if
an
you have a
interest. in it.
conflict, and you really, I mean, you should declare it up front. Right?
Yeah.
You don't participate
Exactly.
in any of the discussion.
Exactly. Right.
That's the recusal right there, is up front saying.
Then abstaining is I don't want to vote.
Yeah.
For a
there could be
number
lot
of
different
reasons,
but yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Click. Okay, agency authority. This is all leading up to the video clip we're gonna play here in just a minute. But this is really important, and something we've started doing, I think it's 2 years running, maybe 3 actually, is advisory committee training. And we try and do that in January when we get new members. But it's also a great reminder for our advisory committee members, right? Because this is not a full-time job. It might feel like it, but it is not. And so I wanted to walk through this. Again, this is intended to inform the video clip we're going to see, but it's also a really great reminder of the agency's authority to take action, to adopt rules, things like that. So chapters 1101, which is sales agents and brokers, and then 1102, which is the inspectors, the Texas Occupations Code, outline the commission's jurisdiction over license holder. There are other statutes that, also influence this, but I'm just going to cover the 2 big ones, 1101 and 1102. Like it says right there. So there are also other statutes that impact our practice when it comes to regulating license holders. The one you see the most often is Chapter 53. You saw it in all of those PFDs today, right? That's how the legislature has told occupational licensing agencies to examine criminal history, things like that, when it comes to either revoking or granting a license. Click, sorry. So the commission has always got to be able to cite its legal authority when it's taking action, right? So if someone were to say, this is the one actually we get the most, and we have these preambles in our rules that every preamble in our rule will tell you exactly where we got our authority to propose and adopt that rule, right? And so it generally is going to cite, well, it's always going to cite back unless it's a special rule to 1101. And it's going to specifically reference the provision that gives the commission that authority, right? So, and we've got one that's a general rulemaking provision in 1101 as it relates to the licensing of our license holders and the items under which we can, revoke, things like that. So there's that, and that always ends up tying back specifically to the functions of the agency. I think Chelsea always describes it well of, the statute gives that, now I think I'm going to say it wrong. It gives the bones,
Meat
and
on
then
the bones.
the rule is the meat on the bones. It's a very Halloween adjacent description. So the one I always think of is, commission rules, because we have to actually, in every single time, we have got to tie it back to statute every single time. And you want that as a licensing agency, right? You want to be able to say, yes, we adopted this rule and here's our authority to do that. And the more express authority that you have, the better, right? That's showing that you're doing the work of the commission as the legislature intended. And so I think commission rules, this is a funny one that I think maybe only I care about, but advisory committees under 1101 actually have a specific carve out from open meetings in that they can do a teleconference option that's different than the kind. So like if we were to do a teleconference with either broker lawyers, a little bit different, or this group, we'd have to have the chair present. But advisory committees can be done entirely virtual or, used to be, I think, even by, I want to say by telephone, but I might be dating myself on that one. And then enforcement actions, like I said, you see, all those references to, what are we taking this action under, which section of statute, which rule, right? And so as an agency, we don't have the ability to say, what I think seems like a great idea, but I can't tell you where we have the authority to do it, right? Because we're legislatively created. We take our direction from the legislature. We take our direction from the office of the governor. We talk about that a lot, right? But the legislature, again, they outline us and the details get filled in, but those details have to point back to the original outline. So something that came up so we went to the Sunset Commission hearing for our limited purpose review related to the contractual disclosures. We weren't the only agency there. There were two others, and they were actually in the second stage of their Sunset Commission review, like talking the full agency review, the kind that I think 2035 are slated for our next one, but I think most people remember the most recent one. And so there were two agencies that were there. I think it was DIR and Texas Lottery Commission for the second part of their review, which is essentially the closing and any sort of last minute recommendations, thoughts. And then we were last because we were at the opening. But sitting there listening to another agency go through that Sunset Commission review is actually really helpful. Because it lets you know what's going on with other agencies, what are the issues that the legislature is identifying, and they're tending to find the things that they see are problematic, which is the nature of the review. And so we just got this really great clip talking about
Authority.
It's agency authority, and you tie it back to your legislation. And what came up is, and this is, I've had this question asked and I get it. Just because there's not a specific prohibition against doing something does not mean the agency has authority to do it. And I, in this example, will think of my kids who are like, well, you didn't say that I couldn't save 5 things of Skittles and go eat them in the treehouse. You said I couldn't eat them in my room, right? Okay. But it's a similar scenario, though it's not Skittles, it's our laws. But it's really that idea of a specific, just because there's nothing saying you can't do it, it does not mean you can't do it.
And it's the reason why so often we have, there's an idea or an initiative and our response is, well, we would need to ask the legislature for that. And I think that's often frustrating, but this is why we do not want to be sitting in these 4 green chairs facing the members. God bless them.
Yes.
Okay, do I understand that this one you recently did was a follow-up on what we went through
No.
7 years ago or
No.
6?
It was limited just to contract form disclosures. It was very narrow, and it was just tied to the required disclosures that are in the TREC contract forms. And I think that's just tied to, I won't truly speculate, but I think there is interest on how do we get to our disclosures? What are all the disclosures? Where's the statutory authority for them? What's the process for the VLC? So it actually ended up being, I think, a really informative review, but it was narrow in that it wasn't a full agency review.
So this is not us up here.
Right.
This is just an
Right.
instructive clip.
But you met recently
Right.
with them and talked to or
Testified.
yes.
Yes.
And so remembering what happened 6, 7 years ago, that's history.
Absolutely.
Okay. This was something different,
It was basically an informational.
informational,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
these folks are going through a true sunset review of the whole agency, and everyone has their turn, right?
Right.
So
We'll see if it works.
let's see if we got it right with our technology.
All right. So
Everybody hold your breath.
I have to mute here and then I'll press play.
Very rarely do you get such a good training nugget as that.
And we'll present that to the advisory committees as well. And we just thought, you know what, that is a really helpful quote to include in training. Because we do receive our direction from the legislature. That's why we always tie back to something in our legislation that allows us to take the action. And in this instance, they were really specifically talking about that workaround of, well, it didn't say I couldn't do that. And I don't know that, you know, I won't prescribe malintent on any of that for anyone. It's just truly, I think sometimes that is the idea that comes into place. Well, I can't see where it says that we couldn't do this. But that's going to all tie back to what I've been talking about, which is find your authority, right? You've always got to find your authority. And if not, then that means, like Chelsea said, then it might need to be a statutory change before you can take the action that you are wanting to take. Okay? I think if I were to say click right now, I would move topics to agenda item 3. So this is standing item on the workshop agenda, advisory committee recommendations. So we don't have an official advisory committee recommendation at this time. The closest we are to a recommendation is from the Broker Responsibility Advisory Committee, and they're working on broker education and experience requirement changes. And so you heard, Ty's actually here. Ty's the chair of the BRAC. Like you said, he's got 1 year under his belt with that. And he gave a report earlier today about where that committee is headed. And the topic on that is the education and experience requirement tied to obtain your broker's license. And some of this is in statute, and some of this we have the statutory authority to adopt rules on. Most recently, in the last legislative session, we received statutory authority to determine the education hours required for a broker's license. Previously, it was actually set out specifically in the statute. And now the commission has the discretion to propose and adopt rules, which is really neat in a couple of ways. One, it allows, we can be more nimble as we see changes in the industry. It actually ends up allowing for a lot of stakeholder input, which is cool. We've got advisory committees, we've got folks who put out public comment on rules, things like that. And so the task that the BRAC, and then I will tell you the BRWG, the working group of years past, multiple iterations, have been tasked with looking at the toggle between education hours and experience required for a broker's license. Now, these are both in rule now, like I said. But you know, Texas has, I believe it's the highest in the nation in terms of education hours. And we've also got room, you know, we require a certain amount of experience. Some of that's set in statute, but what constitutes active experience is determined in rule. And so the task that's been put to the BRAC is, what does that toggle look like in order of allowing for experience to count more and possibly lower education, or there's an alternate path that they're discussing. But what does that toggle look like? Is it a lowering of education and an increase in experience? And what is the appropriate toggle there? Right now, I'll tell you the education has not changed at all. This is what BRAC has been looking at, right? The education is at its cap. So in statute, it's capped at what it has been for the last however many years, meaning you can go lower, you can't go higher, right? And so that's really what they're looking at, is what would that rule change look like? And in correlation with that, what would, if any, you know, it depends on where you land with your recommendation, but if this goes down, how far does this go up? Where do we get to that point that works? And this is, I mean, in terms of policy decisions and what you do, this is pretty significant, right? Because this is how one obtains a broker's license. And so, you know, to the extent anyone has any feedback, I know there was some feedback given in the commission meeting, and that was, I imagine, very helpful to Ty. I'll speak on his behalf. You know, this is something that the group can discuss. The BIAC is going to meet, like Ty said, at some point in December, probably early December, and walk through where they're headed with where they currently stand. So currently they're sitting at education is the same, overall experience has been doubled, but they have created a path for those who want to substitute active experience, and this would be in addition to the actual experience requirement, active experience for some of those education hours. And I believe I have accurately captured that, right?
Pretty much, we're really leveling the playing field by giving an alternate to the CE, because one of the number one things we saw is it takes so long for me to get my CE done. I'm a product of that myself. So I did the CE, I went down that path. And I did it 4 years. But so many people say, hey, you know, it takes so long, but I do a lot of transactions. I'm constantly busy and I'm supervising. Brian Sales is another good example of the same thing. He was a supervisor. So what we want to do is we want to address all those items and give people an alternate path to be able to achieve their goal of being a broker. So we're leveling the playing field by allowing for their experience to act as a conduit to education, because I think we could all agree the best and most effective way to be a broker is to learn it through actually doing and not just through CE.
Right, so there's the alternate path that he's talking about, where you would essentially substitute extra experience for some of the is it 630 real estate related courses. Denise now, yeah.
No, well, is that including your pre-licensure and SAE?
Yes.
It's not, it's 9.
No, it's
$900.
Oh, it's the six, it's the internet total, but the 630 is, that's the outside of the requirement. Yes, it's,
Exactly.
the numbers are.
But
And
to give the commissioners an example, when we originally started this out, and I mentioned Brian Sales is now the vice chair of the advisory committee. When Brian wanted to get his broker's license and he looked at the number of hours he would have to go get because he does not have a college degree to substitute hours, it was far easier for him to get his wife licensed, let her do 4 years, put her on some transactions, and she became the sponsoring and managing broker while he was the delegated supervisor. By the time he got his 900 hours, under the old calculation, he needed 3,600 experience points, and he had 55,000.
Before he got his.
That's stupid.
I mean, I just did a real quick math. I've been licensed 31 years. You add up all my CE, and you can take extra, but you add up all my CE in 31 years, it's 450.
Yeah.
I'm halfway there.
Yeah.
And I like the transactions, but I think you have to be careful because we have markets where their entire inventory is 20 or 30 houses a year.
Yes.
If you're only going to count back 4 years or 5 years, there's no way they're going to get a broker. And I think you have to realize that that's the market. I mean, years ago, I sold 112 houses. I never saw any of them. I was handling all the HUD foreclosures for 42 counties. That looks really good on the transactions, but there was no experience. So, I mean, y'all got a tough job.
Yeah.
But if you double the experience and you're in Crane, Texas, or Fort Stockton, Texas,
Or commercial, and you.
yeah, or commercial.
Sell one
then it's
skyscraper
gonna
a
be-
year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't want to hit that barrier that's going to make the legislature say, no, that's not what we wanted y'all to do. So anyway, y'all got your work.
And Chair, I think the good news is that we're not looking to really change anything except for possibly the experience thing. And that's not been 100% decided. But I can tell you, we want to give this leveling the playing field for agents that would like to achieve the goal of being a broker and upgrading their license. So right now, it's not even an option. So we want to give that option and then balance, just like what you're saying, balance and think about the smaller markets and think about the people that aren't going to get the opportunity to sell 20 and 112 houses a year. But we do have to think about that and look at it, and keep reviewing those comments as they come in, because people do come in and they do comment and they do give their feedback. And there's the vast majority, I will tell you though, don't lower the bar, don't make it easier, because it's too, right now, we're not seeing the representation that we want to see out in the field as brokers. We want to have a higher level of education, a higher level of transaction history, so you can better educate A, the consumer, and B, the agent. So running an organization, you've got to do both. And we have to set the standard for all, but the fact is we have to balance those, and it is a tough balance.
And I agree, but what I see in the market, and I'm in there every day, 7 days a week, I see people opening offices and finding a sponsor broker somewhere else, and they don't even need the broker's license.
Yes.
And I'm afraid if we don't get it fixed, we're gonna see a multitude of those. And I think that's gonna be,
Agreed.
but I mean, good, big or small, great ran brokerages and not so great ran brokerages. We just need to try to figure out to where, if you want to step up for a broker and you don't have that college degree, let so much experience offset education, but yet don't make the experience so high that someone can't get it that's actually doing some business. Yeah. I'm glad it's y'all, not me.
Either that, or I would submit on the flip side is, don't give college credit anymore. And level the playing field from an education standpoint. And everybody's got to get X number of hours, regardless of whether you have a degree or not. Because your art history degree ain't doing anything for you.
But I think what we've found is that it does to an extent, right? Because we're only counting a portion of that degree.
Right.
And the way
Sorry,
that.
I should have said criminal justice, so I apologize.
Well, I think Vanessa actually is making a very good point. And when we went back and we talked, because we did spend a very large amount of time talking about the college degree, because honestly, it was my inclination that that was going to be an issue. The basket weaving, I kept using that, or, other, degree paths. But what we found is a lot of the baseline education that you're getting in college is what you need, to put towards your broker's license. And it is relative. So I think we pulled that off the table.
But that was, it's just to the credit of the VRAC, like that was a conversation and it went every which way. But that is an area where they went every which way. They looked at it and, I think it seemed like it was going one way and then it actually ended up going another way. And there's no formal recommendations before you today, but that is the work of the advisory committee.
Chair, I feel very strong that we're going to have a recommendation in February.
Good.
Okay. Go ahead.
I heard that.
It's on the record. That'll be in the minutes.
He did say straw.
All right, I'm gonna sit down.
You can get a second.
Qualifier.
Okay, this is a
Right.
quick slide. I'm not gonna spend much time on it. I am gonna stay seated. I'm sorry. If you'll remember, in the non-legislative years, we ask y'all to submit initiatives that you would like to staff to spend time on. Just how do you, what things rise to the top in terms of what we should accomplish. And then you all came together and you agreed on this list of items. And so I wanted to kind of close out the year by just telling you how we did on those items. First is to move to electronic files. I have to say that one of our biggest hurdles was to get our HR files electronic, and that has now been complete. Really excited about that. So that was our last division that needed to move over. It doesn't mean that we are without paper in our office now. We still process paper checks, and we also process some paper applications. Both of those items will be eliminated with the change from Versa to Acela. And so this is ongoing and in progress, but we have made good progress. One of the things that is working well for us on this is a move to a new building. We're not making plans for a file room. I'm just not doing it. We will be electronic. Our file room will be in the cloud entirely. So over the course of the next couple of years, any remaining files that need to be purged through the records retention policy, we will work to do that, so that the only real storage we have in our new facility are like holiday decorations, party supplies, things of that nature, but it won't be official documents. So I'm excited about that one. Broker succession, well done. This one is complete. We had that rule change was proposed in May. It was adopted in August. We have done some blasts to our license holder community and some communication in all of my talks at local board meetings. I have included this item to highlight. I know the chair has done the same. It is included in the broker responsibility course materials that will begin being taught in January. Okay, thank you. And then it has gone out in our newsletter. Yes, sir.
Let me add, I want to thank Commissioner Woodruff and Commissioner Pena for in the executive. You know, we always did this, but it was never a rule. And we were told for years it could not be. And I'm telling you, I think that is one of the best things we have done as a commission to help the consumers with this broker succession rule. I know anyone that has a business entity, this has been just a lifesaver. It really has. And so we brought it up and staff was doing it, and staff said, hey, we can make this a rule. That way it can't, that way next year or 5 years from now, they can't change it and say, well, no, we want Joe's inactivated now. It was a policy, now it's a rule. And I think it's one of the biggest things we've accomplished. And since I've been here was giving people the peace of mind that if something happens, that their people and their consumers are protected.
Sure.
So
The public comment with respect to the escrow that was retained by the broker that passed away, is that something that could have been alleviated with the current rules or what?
well, possibly, but there's a lot of missing information. So,
Yeah, I don't know that we know enough on that.
Yeah. A lot of missing
The way it
information.
reads, that agent shouldn't have had an escrow account.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah,
It's also a great talking point to use now to encourage broker entities to set up a plan
Right.
for broker succession. That's the big piece, right? I mean, we can change the rule, but they still need to be planning for that. Okay, broker associates. We'll put a pin in this one. This one is basically just the treatment of brokers or treating of broker associates differently, like on our website, and then informing the brokerage when a broker associate has an enforcement action against them. It's a few different items. We're going to handle that in the legislative update as a potential legislative change, but TBD on that one. And then advertising education. This is ongoing. It was included what the right, just teaching on advertising. It's included in the broker responsibility course book as a good highlight, but really this is ongoing. Advertising is so important, and we see violations a lot. They're also pretty easy to correct, and we have a mechanism to do that through our enforcement process in a fairly simple way. But this will be an ongoing education initiative through articles and through social media. But we have done some of that this year, and then also infused that into the broker responsibility course. Did I miss anything there? Good. Okay, and then research options for background checks. This was covered in the February 2024 workshop, just outlining kind of all the options there. And based on that workshop, we're considering that one complete. That was early in the year. So those are the 2024 initiatives. A few of those, of course, are ongoing. In 2025, our initiatives will basically be the implementation of legislative changes. And then at the end of 2025, we will collect your thoughts on initiatives for 2026. Very good? Okay, moving on. We are on slide 18 of 28. Want you to know where we are.
Hey y'all. So now I'm doing PR stuff, the GR hat, but there's actually a lot of overlap between communications and what I'll be doing with government relations, because it's all about facilitating connections and discussions and making sure that the right people are at the table and we have everything we need for implementation or being responsive to requests from the legislature or stakeholders like associations. So these are just some key dates for y'all. You'll see bill filing is coming up quite soon, so we'll be busy tracking those as they come in. And since I'll be taking over what Tony was doing, one of those items is keeping y'all updated about what's going on during the legislative session. So my plan for that is to provide you with some periodic updates on things that we're going to talk about here, but also things that may affect the industry as well as this agency, how the agency runs as a whole. And that should just be a really high level overview of items. And this will be new for me and new for y'all to get from me. So I welcome your feedback on that. And if you have requests or like changes or anything like that, but I want it to be pretty simple for you guys so you get what you need really quick. So
Summer, I'm going to interrupt you for just
Go
1
for it.
second after these deadlines. If you have, through the legislative process, this is a little bit like what we say with the media, that if you get contacted by a member of the legislature or their office on an item relating to real estate in your capacity as a commissioner, or really just because you're a commissioner and it relates to real estate or the codes that affect us, the statutes that affect us, please coordinate that with us. Even if you don't have your commissioner hat on, the legislative office might think that you do. And so just what I like to say among our stakeholders, the associations we work with, and then collectively as a group, is that we don't want any surprises. We want everyone to be in lockstep. And so just letting us know those things and so that we can coordinate efforts is imperative. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
I think that's a great point. And a lot of times what I find with staff is that they don't really know anything about the real estate commission in general. So I can do some of that legwork for you of explaining who we are, what we do, all of that kind of stuff. Because sometimes that's just kind of what they need is, what is your role here and do I come to you or not? So I think putting it in the same bucket as media type requests will be hopefully helpful for all of y'all. So click. Yes. Thanks, Abby. So now we're going to go through these legislative topics. There shouldn't be any surprises here. These are all things that we've been talking about at advisory committee meetings, things like that for years, and items that have come from you and others. So the first one here is requiring the broker responsibility course at a broker's license application and at renewal. And this is going to be regardless of whether a broker intends to sponsor anyone. So right now you don't have to take that course if you are not sponsoring, but if this passes, and it's a recommendation by the broker responsibility working group, so that's how long this has been on the table, then the stated purpose is that it will enhance consumer protection because brokers are going to be updated often and with timely information. And then it ultimately provides flexibility for brokers because maybe now you don't think you're going to sponsor anyone, and maybe in a year you decide you will. And now you're set up to do that. Oh, I also forgot to mention, if you have any comments or questions or concerns about these, now's a good time to let us know. And we've also run all of these items by stakeholders and gotten their input. So,
are we going to see the drafts of these?
yes. All right, the next one is to allow us to adjust qualifying education requirements by rule instead of statute. Vanessa was talking about this earlier, like on the broker side, we had to do that last session. We want to do this now for sales agents, including an initial sales agent license. And the reason we would want that is the same reason we did for the broker stuff. It's hard to adjust things in statutes, and session only comes around once every other year. There's no guarantee that what you have will pass, and it can make our courses inflexible and stale. So this would just allow us to be a little bit more nimble, and then it may remove a barrier to entry for non-residents who want to apply. All right, the next one is under this education bucket. This is recommended by the Texas Real Estate Inspector Committee. It's requiring apprentice inspectors to take 4 hours of pre-licensing education. The stated purpose of that recommendation is that it provides these apprentice inspectors with like a foundational knowledge about SOPs in the industry. I will say that there's not support necessarily for this change from the association. And I'm happy to talk about that if anyone has questions about that.
I think mainly we're just,
Yeah.
well, hold on. I'll say, sorry, that sounded wrong, but I think I can clear what you said. We've had a couple of different conversations with, remind me, TREC. And the first was like, yeah, we can't support this. The second, Lee had, which was, we're indifferent to it, which I think indicates more than anything that we have some work to do to just make sure that we're all in lockstep. Our goal is that if we move forward with this, that one of the first questions that a member of the legislature will ask is there any opposition? And we want to make sure that the answer to that is no. I'm confident that we can get there. We just haven't done all the leg work on there. But I think based on Lee's most recent conversation, it doesn't sound like there's or there is opposition, just kind of an indifference.
Right, because you called me the other day and stated that TREC had a real problem, was really opposing it. And so I reached out to the chair of that organization, had a conversation, and he had informed me that how I explained what we're talking about here was not how it was explained to him. And once went through the reasonings behind it, the conversation that we've had, he was rather indifferent, because it doesn't really affect his members. It's only for pre-licensure of apprentice inspectors, which is such a small percentage of the people that apply for that position anyway. But his position, well, I'm not really for it, but I'm not really against it either. It certainly doesn't hurt my members. So it's, it's kind of, he's like, I just don't know if it's needed, but it wasn't opposition. It's just like,
yeah,
kind of from their perspective, because they're representing existing license.
Yeah.
Was that the only association that would be involved in this?
There's other smaller trade associations that are like TREC, which is based up in the DFW area. They're actually all for it. But I also attend those meetings regularly and have those conversations, and you kind of hatch through a lot of that stuff.
Would it be best for Lee to start talking to these people since he understands it better?
Well, I think there has to be a voice from TREC that coordinate. I mean, we will need to be the ones that kind of coordinate that effort, but absolutely we'll make sure all of these conversations happen. The other variable that we need to worry about is like the regulatory compliance of the governor's office, barrier to entry, adding a barrier to the entry of this field. I don't necessarily think that that's going to kill this legislation. I just think we need to get over that hurdle and make sure that we can explain that well. So that we just have not completed. This is the time for all of that work to be happening.
If Lee could be part of those conversations, I think it would be very helpful.
I think that's just great. Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to move on to the other one. I would love to talk more about your conversation since I didn't have that one. All right. This one is another initiative that's been talked about for a while. It's notifying broker associates or notifying brokers of complaints against broker associates. And this would be a notice of a complaint. It's not a notice of disciplinary action. And this could end the ability for broker associates to associate with multiple brokers. We would need to add a definition of associate broker. It's specific only to this area of statute though. Also, we would need a formal process to collect that information. And we would also want to just make sure that we have, essentially have all of our ducks in a row. And the reasoning for this is that it may help a broker assist that broker associate in navigating a complaint. And it's also, you know, they're operating under your brand umbrella, so you want to know what they're doing. Next one is also related to broker associates. It's indicating affiliation on our website. We would need to have a regulatory change to be able to collect that information and display it. The purpose, again, is just making sure people know who associates with who.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Yeah, for sure.
The conversation that we've had, broker responsibility working group all the way back a couple of years has been, really all we need here is broker associate defined in law, and then we can rule make around.
Correct.
Correct, not correct? I don't know.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think part of either of these is going to involve a definition of broker associate, because there's not currently one in statute. And so we would have, in order to create these requirements, we'd have to nail down actually what a broker is.
Can you go back to the slide right
So-
before that?
I guess the question is, do we need statute specific to those two things, or do we just need statute specific to the defining of broker associate?
We do need authority for both of those two things, because of how, I know, it's probably too much information, but just how specific the statutory requirements for what it currently is, what it states now, need to be expanded a little bit.
Would then, if we had that broker associate definition in statute, and Ty's group came up with something down the road, would we then be able to rule make around that, or would we be talking about another statutory change?
It would depend on what the issue is that we're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay.
And why isn't disciplinary action included in this?
It's not.
I said, why is it not?
Oh,
It says of a complaint and not notice of disciplinary action is what
That
it
was
says.
the recommendation, was notice of a complaint.
I know, I remember notice of a complaint, but we didn't say, I don't remember them not saying, including disciplinary.
Talking about
we can
the end
double check it.
result.
So
I just
Yeah.
remember if one of my agents is
you want to
a
know.
broker associate, I want to know if they get a complaint filed against them. I don't think we ever took it beyond the disciplinary action being issued.
Well, the disciplinary action is public.
Yeah.
And the first thing is basically the initiation. If you know a complaint's filed, then it's basically on you to say,
Follow it.
tell me more. Yeah, but if that doesn't feel like what the actual recommendation was, we can double check it.
It just doesn't seem like that's that big a deal to tell them about the disciplinary action, especially since you're saying it's public.
Yeah, because it really isn't adjudicated until it
Correct.
goes to the end, right?
Right.
So you wouldn't know if
Mhm.
there was
Okay.
an adverse, it was dismissed, or if there was an adverse.
You just know to ask. Yeah, or know to look.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll look.
I think there's a layer, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, contact information. So y'all might recall last legislative session, SB 510 passed, which limits the information that us and other licensing agencies are able to display publicly or provide to people. So that's contact information, making that private. And so we would need statutory authority for that. I can tell you that there are other agencies, licensing agencies that are talking about this exact issue, and they are seeking similar things, although it's very early days. We'll be involved in that conversation, so we'll know the direction they're heading. So it remains to be seen whether that's something TREC has to do on its own, specific to us, or if there's something larger that kind of applies across regulatory licensing agencies.
I thought the Senate bill said that you could have the business information, just not the home information.
Yes.
It's correct. It's that we, in our statute, it doesn't distinguish between the two. And so what she's talking about is actually in our statute, distinguishing between this, what contact information is and actual business contact information.
But it might be taken care of more generally than our need to do that.
Great, this one is under the finance bucket. So we want to remove remittance to general revenue fund. So there is a section in the Texas Occupation Code that requires the agency to remit $750,000 each fiscal year. So that's by August 31st to the general revenue fund. This is not a fund that benefits the agency in any way whatsoever. If we could just strike that portion of the occupations code, we would be able to use those funds to offset agency costs and hopefully in long term reduce fee increases for license holders.
So this is like a best case scenario.
Yeah.
We're holding this very loosely and we will not push this at all. This is kind of a lab, if you will. We have successfully spent down or are in the process of spending down the excess funds that were criticized in the previous sunset review. And that was by design, right? We were directed to spend that down. So our revenue is lower than our expenses currently. And we are working to get a fee increase that would equalize that. As we look at our expenses, this is a driver. 750,000 is a significant piece of our budget each year. So it would be a significant win if we could reduce this or eliminate it. There's been talk of it in the past, and other SDSI agencies, some of them don't have a similar payment, others do, and the amounts that they pay seem inconsistent. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason for the amount. So this is just sort of a, let's see how it goes.
You load out a trial and see what
That's right.
They won't give it if you won't ask.
Huh?
That's right. They won't give it if you don't ask.
That's right.
That's right.
This is just some general cleanup, just a couple items. So there's a repealed Residential Service Companies Act that's referenced that should be removed. And then we also want to replace the word check with payment in a couple places to align with that commission initiative to go paperless and also use electronic funds. Yeah, online payment systems. Perfect. So that's it.
Well done, Summer.
Let me just add something to what Chelsea said. If you get a call from your local state rep or whatever, and they ask about a specific bill or your opinion, I mean, we need to speak through our sources. And the last thing I want is to think my opinion is considered lobbying. Because, I mean, we cannot lobby as an agency. We cannot. And yeah, there's a lot of times I would love to call someone and give them Scott's opinion, but Scott does not have an opinion. It is commissioner's opinion. And so we need to be very careful. And that's why we have such a good relationship with our shareholders, TDI, Texas Realtor, TLTA, and everybody else, because what's good for the industry, they can help us. But we got to be careful not to lobby. Because you might just think, well, it's just, you asked me a question, I answered it. And then the testimony is going to be, well, Commissioner Pena said this would really, yeah. So just do what?
A good idea.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah. So let's just be very careful with that, especially as volatile as this session's going to be. I mean, they might get a bunch done. They might not get anything done.
Again.
Yeah. So like any session.
Again.
Yeah. Again. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Do we have plans from a stakeholder outreach standpoint to do anything with Texas Realtors for their Realtor Day at the Capitol?
No, because we do not lobby.
Yeah.
But we often will like visit with people who come, or if there is a reason for us to kind of partner, we absolutely will. And we are partnering with them now to make sure that their initiatives for the legislative session, we can testify on in a way that is coordinated and that they can, like, I'm not going to be at the Capitol asking for the $750,000 reduction, but they may include it in some of theirs. That sort of thing.
Vanessa,
Yes.
with respect to lobbying, is that for commissioners or for commissioners and staff?
Yeah, it's really that the agency can't lobby, but that has generally extended to the full commission simply because, I mean, I think you can go there on your own, like, it's hard. You're never really yourself when you're there, right? And you're probably not even, how's that for an answer? I mean, you're never Ben Pena when you're there, talking about real estate, right? Similarly, you're probably never even Commissioner Ben Pena when you're there talking about real estate. You are the commission. And so I think it's that coordinated effort of making sure that there's awareness on all counts and that there's not this argument that then extends to the agency is out here lobbying and there's a prohibition against that, because we can really only be factual in our testimony. Like we're sort of that expert testimony of what would this, if this went through, what would this look like? Not what's your opinion on this law. And so we, the approach of this agency has been to sort of take it from the angle I just gave you, which is there is no individual, really probably not even a one commissioner, it's the commission. And then all of a sudden it's the agency, and how on earth is the agency up here lobbying for these changes?
Now, if you are talking about gun safety, abortion rights, whatever the issue that does not affect TREC, and you go with a group of community volunteers, or you're going in a different capacity, that's absolutely your right to do. But if you're handing out a business card that says TREC, or you mention, or if it's in our wheelhouse, that's where it's sticky.
It gets murky. And so I think coordinating is the best, right? Just everyone knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
No, and I certainly appreciate it, because me going as Commissioner Bentheny is really not accurate. There could be a perception that I'm speaking on behalf of the entire commission.
That's right.
And that's not good.
And Chance, I will not go to Realtor Day. Just bottom line. Will not.
Either will.
Yeah.
It's my daughter's birthday anyway.
You thanks to do.
Another day off.
Well, I will say that because I experienced this last session, when you're working with legislative staff, they want factual information. They want what I just showed you. They don't want my opinion. They want the facts of what the outcomes would be. And that's where I think the line gets murky, but that's why there's very clear, this is what it is. This is how it would would affect consumers, or it's just Residential Services Act does not exist anymore. So things like that. So it is a very fine line between sounding like we're pushing for something versus here's just the information. So.
Yeah, just got the point. When I was on the State Board of Public Accountancy and the Texas Society of CPAs, which is a similar Texas social, they had their day at the Capitol. I wouldn't even get near them because I didn't want them to have a perception that I was there on behalf of the board.
Same.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, let's move to agenda item number 6. And I'm going to handle this in 2 pieces. We have 2 public comments. One of them go. I want to talk about a couple of things really quick. Everybody received the materials from Commissioner Lerner. Hopefully you reviewed them and you're prepared to discuss them. We're not presenting materials right now. We're not talking about specifically about the cases. But hopefully Commissioner Lerner's material will help us identify big picture items we want to discuss as far as enforcement. Our focus will be on potential policy changes. We can't relitigate the cases. They're closed. We'll look at if we need to make policy changes in the end. Currently we have a process for reconsidering cases. It's handled at the staff level enforcement. So what we're going to do is we've got 2 public comments. We'll hear them, and then we'll hear Commissioner Lerner's concerns, and then we'll figure out where y'all want to go with this enforcement. Okay, and I think enforcement also has some things. Your material, you got the complaint flow chart and also the discipline flow chart that I think is really cool. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to open this up. We're going to be very careful what information is given. And who, Jim or Jennifer, who's going first? Okay, it's Jim. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
All right.
I just, before we do public
Okay.
comment, so you've seen me up here today on general counsel. I want to make sure we are not speaking to specific license holders or specific cases. And that is because this body makes the decisions, and we can't take information that's not on the record. There may be subsequent actions that could be taken, depending on, I know we're talking a lot about, it seems like we're talking about violations of TREC, and then we've also got, the requirements of the license. And in order to make sure that we have a commission that can take official action should something come up, we've really got to keep it at that high level policy discussion. Otherwise, we could end up in a situation where I've got 9 commissioners who can't take official action on something. And I do not want to be in that position. I don't think anyone does, including you. I just want to make sure you understand the reason we're doing that, and we're keeping it at that policy level. And I want you to share what you want to share, but we really can't get into specific cases, certainly not names, and certainly not things that aren't in the record of discussions or cases that we've had. And that's true for everyone here. And I'm doing that because, we've got license holders that have entered into agreed orders, or we've got license holders who have already been adjudicated through us, or license holders who've already been adjudicated by the system. And we've got to make sure we're in an open meeting. This is the governing board that makes these decisions. We've got to make sure that we're doing that right. So to the extent I interrupt at any point, it is not out of emotion. It is just out of legal counsel and making sure that we're getting it right, not only for the commission, but for the license holder community. And I think I assume everyone here understands that. So.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. I will avoid the last part of this.
Right.
No, I do appreciate you guys listening to me today. I drove a couple hours down here just for these couple minutes. I've been a realtor for 16 years now, and I love what I do. I absolutely do. I supervise 30 agents within a group that I own, and another 200 within the brokerage that I general manage. So this is near and dear to my heart. And I think we're entering into a very, very strange time I've seen a lot of fraud cases come through, and I've seen more in the last year in my small town of Rockwall, Texas, or the last year than I ever had. And it's not just the consumer. I'm seeing agents behind it too. And that requires a different eye.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Do you mind just stating your name for the record?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Jim Duquette.
Right, great, thank you.
License number.
It's okay.
Yes, ma'am. And excuse me, I am going to read because I put together about 3 or 4 different versions of what I wanted to say today. And the first one was about 20 minutes long, and I can get long-winded. So I got it narrowed down to very few. So I'm a man of faith, and I believe in grace, forgiveness, and second chances. I also firmly believe that choices come with consequences. Poor decisions have significant consequences for others. And it is our duty to show discernment, especially when investigating issues within our real estate community. In life, some things are rights, while others are privileges. The hold of real estate license is indeed a privilege, not a right. When someone has committed a crime against the public, they have broken the trust placed in them by society. If I were to go out tonight and drink and drive later, I'm probably losing my driver's license. I won't do it though. A realtor must be a trustworthy advocate, exhibiting discernment and integrity. When someone has been involved in a crime, it shows that they put their own interests above others and place society at risk. We have to have investigative practices that must reflect this understanding and must ensure that individuals who have breached public trust are not given the continued privilege of holding a real estate license. We should have a thorough investigative and interview process with all parties to distinguish between fact and falsehood. You were talking about your child earlier. I got 3 boys of my own, and I know anytime that they do something wrong, and they do things wrong every now and then, they are going to give me some version of the truth. And the truth is somewhere mixed in all those words they say. It's important to get everybody involved to really figure out what happened. As realtors, it is our duty to be ethical and treat all parties fairly. And Article 3 of the Code of Ethics from NAR states that it is the duty of the realtor to protect the public against fraud, misrepresentation, unethical practices, and real estate transactions. And then it goes into a bunch of things I'm just not going to say because I've been asked not to. So I'm going to just say a couple other things though. Because, so if I do say go off the rails, just
I'll let you know.
thank you, man. I was involved in something that had happened in Rockwall County. I was called once for about 2 minutes and in discussing what had happened. I was let know that they were going to involve somebody else, and I would hear from them TREC legal later. I was never contacted after that. I think there's a lot of pertinent things that happened during this, and jury appears that this is all the same thing. I think we need to really look at what our investigative practices are to protect the community, not just from the consumer. It's like I said, I'm seeing more and more, and they're getting clever. They've got a weird end game. There's some strange things out there. But it's really eye-opening to see that the people that we are licensing getting in on what is happening. Betraying the public trust betraying the trust that I have in another agent. They're going into people's homes, they're writing contracts, they're looking to defraud buyers and sellers alike. We need to be ahead of this and not behind this because it's only going to grow. Thank you all for listening to me today.
Well, I want to thank you for making the 2-hour drive. I want to thank you for bringing your concerns. I said this in the general setting during the commission meeting. Any public comment we hear, we got to be very careful, but do not think if we do not take it to heart and try to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jennifer.
Hi, start with your name.
I'm Jennifer Fogg, and I am the Rockwall County Clerk, and I really appreciate the commissioners and the committee members for allowing me to be here today. I am very animated whenever I talk, and I talk a lot, so shut me down whenever my time is up. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good tactic. Yeah.
Everybody, let's not wait at the same time. So I do a lot of training across Rockwall County for realtors and everybody in the real estate industry. And when I do that, I do it because I'm very passionate about property fraud. And Jim can vouch for this. So everybody knows that Jennifer Fogg, Rockwall County Clerk, does not stay in her lane. Look, I wish I was a cop. I wish I was a lawyer, but I'm not. I'm a clerk. And I take my job and my oath very seriously. And so in that, whenever somebody comes to me and they say that they've been traumatized, victimized by a property fraud transaction, I'm going to take it and I'm going to run with it and I'm going to make sure everybody knows about it. And then in the process, we all get educated. It's unfortunate, but it's also something that is an unfortunate benefit, if you will, whenever something like this happens. It has happened to somebody on the legislature that I did testify before recently, and it's unfortunate, but it opened her eyes. And so this session, we are going to make some changes as far as property fraud goes. So do you know what a sovereign citizen is? Does anybody in this room know what a sovereign citizen is? So I took an oath. I took an oath to follow the laws of this state and of the United States, so help me God. A sovereign citizen does not respect the laws of this state or of the United States. Okay. The interaction that I've had with a realtor that is a sovereign citizen is a very,
I think I'm gonna have to stop you there, just based on what I've seen.
okay.
And I will again point out here that we've got, there's two investigations generally, right? Am I saying that right, Mike? You've got violations of TREC, and then you've got the license itself, like the maintaining of the license, honesty, integrity, et cetera. So I'm just gonna note, there's two separate things there. But I just don't
Stop talking about that.
stop talking about that, but keep going.
Okay, so when, that was a whole stack, so. Whenever I go around and I'm talking to anybody in the real estate industry, to law enforcement, what have you, there are serious questions. There's a difference between civil and criminal, right? So what I would like to recommend, if that's allowed, is have agents take an oath. To me, whenever I swear in my staff, I explain to them, this is so serious. Like, this oath means a lot to me in here. So it should mean a lot to you in here. And so whenever we agree by raising our right hand and swearing or affirming to uphold the laws of this state and of the United States, so help me God. And so I would recommend doing an oath for agents. Another thing that I would encourage you to do is collaborate with industry partners. Don't limit it just to the direct real estate industry. If you could open it up to county clerks like myself to see what it is that we're experiencing, what are we seeing? Because whenever you're going to the legislature and you're opting for changes, who are your partners? Don't exclude county clerks, because we do file the documents. We do have a lot of knowledge. We may not have a license. We don't have the real estate background, because as a county clerk, you can't do that. But anyway, that's besides the point. But I would not limit it just to the specific industry, because county clerks, we see a lot. Like, my office is the most diverse in the entire county. And so with that, I would like to recommend that you strengthen laws. I would think that you would want to advocate for victims assistance. I don't know if that's within your scope, but I do. I'm very passionate about property fraud. I'm very passionate about doing what's right, and I'm very passionate about supporting victims. And so it doesn't matter. It could be a $5 million house. It could be a $168,000 house. It doesn't matter. The person worked so hard. And so as you are all in this industry, you can also be victimized. And so one of the things that I would recommend is getting a copy of the ID of the person that you're doing business with. Looking at it. Have a situation that is a closed case, not with y'all at all. It is with an attorney. He did give me permission to talk about it. It's not with TREC at all, and it's not coming here. The unfortunate part of his transaction is somebody was trying to sell his land in Rockwell County, and it's vacant land, and they created fake driver's licenses. Everybody knows this family, everybody. And so I knew whenever I looked at the licenses, I was like, that's not them. And so I offered, this is where y'all know I get out of my lane. I offered to, at my own expense, travel to where these alleged sellers were and pose as an escrow officer. Let me go close the deal. Let me go over the HUD and all their documents. Set them up, take them down. And so they said no, but I get it. So, but anyway, sometimes we have to be unapologetically unafraid. And so that is something that I constantly tell my staff, because it just takes once. And if they come after you, if they go after your home, you've worked really hard for it. They pull you in, they victimize you. And that's not fair. It's not fair to anybody in this room to be exposed to that kind of criminal activity. And so I would just want to encourage that you bring in other industry leaders, including county clerks. So, and I'm here to take any questions. I'm here to stay after if anybody wants to talk afterward. I'm a 3.5 hour drive, just like to.
Well, I had just a question, is it part of your county clerk duties to be engaged with something like this? And you answered that on your opening statement about running the passion for land and.
Jennifer, you want to give them a little background of why you are here? What drew you here?
Without crossing the line?
Without crossing the line.
I'm not sure I know how to not cross the line. Okay, I crossed the line, I shut down. I'm just overly passionate about property fraud, and it could happen to anybody, and it could be somebody who, if this happens to somebody, I would want to treat them as if it was my own family member that I was going to stick my neck out for, regardless of if I know them, never met them before. I'm going to stick my neck out for you. I'm going to try to do what's right, and I'm going to bring awareness to what is wrong with the situation, including, and it's not to throw anybody under the bus, right? We all have our sphere of expertise, if you will, and certainly sometimes I think my scope is more than what it is, but then I get corrected, and that's fine. I don't mind being checked. But whenever it comes to law enforcement, is anybody in here in law enforcement? Because this is not bad, it's not negative. I just want to be heard by law enforcement. Property fraud there's a fine line between civil and criminal. And I thought for sure he was a cop, but.
It's not relevant to this conversation.
So, but I feel like awareness and collaboration and creating the dialogue is first and foremost. And so I'm here to be any type of support that I can. And so are my staff. They're all very willing and able to participate. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate y'all both being here and bringing information. I know we've put stuff together in the past, looking at wholesaling, and we included a lot of people and probably should have done any questions on that too. So, yeah. All right. Is it okay if we take a 5-minute break real quick? Okay.
Great.
Okay, we're back in
That's a
session.
good point.
The last 2 November workshop, we've included enforcement issues. We reviewed at the executive committee level. We all had an opportunity to review the information from Commissioner Lerner. We studied the process. We looked at the cases. Over the years, we haven't found any sweeping enforcement changes. I guess my question is, do we have any specific changes on policy, consensus on enforcement, on what we received and what we heard? I mean, I want specific recommendations.
Can I stop for a second? This has
Okay.
nothing to do with what staff sent us in those 3 handouts. This has stuff to do with our investigative procedures, which we have never, ever discussed. We've alluded to them, but we haven't discussed them. So I think it would be best to ask Mike, what are our investigative procedures? How do we investigate?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna ask him not to stand up and spitball that. If we needed to have, I'm happy for Mike and his entire team to provide a presentation on what he does in the investigative process. He's not prepared. He doesn't have a PowerPoint
But this is
prepared to do
exactly
that.
what I asked Vanessa for last time, and I put it in emails over and over. It's about investigative procedures.
Agency enforcement processes in assumed business names.
Okay.
And included investigative procedures. I didn't ask Mike to prepare like a presentation on it though. On their investigative process. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought actually.
How's the enforcement office, how is the enforcement staff trained for these investigations?
Well, again, I mean, I want to be careful having Mike answer off the cuff without being prepared. This is what we want to hear. We received your comments. We received your information. We certainly, the two people that spoke certainly gave us some insight on what we might need to look at in the future. But I need to know, I mean, specific changes. This reminds me of years and years ago when the call center was not operating as smoothly as we thought. We went in and we thought we can tweak here. Now we have an average hold time of 54 seconds. You know, enforcement at one time had probably 60, 70% of their cases over a year. Now it's 94%, 95% under 6 months. You know, I mean, are there specific changes we need to do to help tweak that process? And that's what I would like to entertain here.
There's a lot of changes, but I mentioned this 3 months ago. And it's sad that we're in this position right now, but there are no answers. 3 months ago.
But we need the questions for the answers.
I said investigative procedures. I said it in the meeting. I said it in emails, and we have nothing. We're just sitting here staring at each other. There's not even I gave you a presentation. You shot that down too. So that presentation showed you exactly where we're failing.
But the present in the
That's
August,
public information.
and not everything on the presentation.
Yes, it was. It was
Okay.
for all from the.
In the August meeting, you want to talk about enforcement. And if you want to talk about specifically the investigative process, follow up on the calls, follow up on stuff, that was no part of the information I received. Was it?
And it was. And it's also the presentation you demanded I give you 2 weeks ago. The first slide says investigative procedure. So there's a disconnect, obviously.
Okay. Commissioners, specific ideas. I mean,
We're not contacting the right people. We're more focused on the time that we're getting this done versus investigating it properly. I can find more information online than is even in the TREC file. We're asking people for written answers from a broker going, well, how did you do this? And it was obvious that probably an attorney filled it in. I mean, you're not even interviewing people face to face. Mrs. Fogg wasn't interviewed on a huge case that was in her office. A broker who's highly involved in TREC and Texas Realtors wasn't even called on the same case, that he was the broker of the listing agent.
so you think there's too much quantity and not enough quality?
There is zero quality. There are so many.
Okay,
gaps
see,
in this.
right there, okay.
There's so
Yeah,
many gaps in this.
We're gonna be very careful because we were in the commission meeting today and we had 4 go to SOA and we had 4 come back.
I get
And
that.
for a commissioner to say there's no quality in our enforcement division, I just,
There's some quality, but how can you not look at the first case I gave you and go, there is so much.
we're not
missing
going
here."
back to those
I'm
cases.
not looking, I'm saying, how can you look at this case and say there's not stuff missing? How can how could anyone look at it?
And again, I mean, okay. I think enforcement is doing a great job getting things turned. And the process is a complaint comes in, they investigate, and there's several choices. And I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on this, but there's an advisory letter, there's an agreed order, and then there's a contested that goes to SOA. And I think the agreed orders they get, years and years ago, they focused on nothing but the money. And now they're doing the money and the education, which I would rather have to, you can hurt them in the pocketbook or you can hurt them in the seats and through a 30-hour contracts class. And so, I mean, give me specifics that you want to see change.
That didn't even address the investigative process, which you just said. The investigative process has to change.
Maybe it would be helpful.
I think that's beyond the scope. I mean, our job is to set agency policy, not specific investigative procedures. That's Chelsea and her team's job. And so I think that I don't see where any of those policies has been violated. I don't know that we can get into the weeds on every single investigation because every one of them is different. It's all cases are different, our respondents are different. And so unless there's a specific violation of policies that we have approved, then I don't see where each individual getting that granular is out.
Our role is to hold license holders accountable and ensure that we have proper oversight of them. It is also to oversee the agency and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well,
So our job is twofold,
there's
and that is
specific
what is
concerns.
prescribed to us.
our direction.
So we're relying on what everybody tells us. And if you're getting arrested by a policeman, are you going to go, "Hey, officer, I did it"? No. You're going to have to go and find out what's going on. And it's very easy to find this information for the most part. I'm not even an investigator and I can find most of it.
If the enforcement committee won't pick it up and look at it.
What they do.
Right.
Yeah, no, they look at reconsideration. That's their job.
Right, and the offense and it's a limited enforcement committee, purpose.
Well, so when we look at the like the org chart, I don't know what I did with it, but the process chart, which I thought I had with me, but thank you very much. Had everything else. I guess, look, so when you talk about the complaint process and the investigation process, you're talking, it seems to me like, okay, this is the broad strokes of the thing. And then when, was there another? Thank you. Enforcement. Thank you. And so I was in preparing for this, I was thinking, okay, back to the procedures. So, okay, we've got a flow chart here of the process. And I guess what you're saying is you're suggesting that there's either missing steps and or taking issue potentially with what is a big box of mitigating factors that get considered. I guess if you just sort of look at it.
So if you were to look at one of the cases I gave you, or anything I gave you, the county clerk was never talked to. There was a statement that was fraudulent that was included in there. It was easily seen that was fraudulent. There was documentation that was completely obvious it was fraudulent.
Again, the problem that we're seeing here is we can't talk about that case. We cannot decide what has happened in that case. Like, we're not the criminal system. We can look at the Trello violation, and if ultimately something comes back to us on a criminal conviction at all that we have the authority to take action on, we can, but we can't go in there and decide how something needs to be adjudicated, and we can't be pulling things that aren't part of an official record or making decisions on what we think happened in a criminal case. We don't have that authority. And we just, that's, I know I sound like I'm, don't talk about it, but I'm doing that because we can't do that. We cannot go outside of our lane as the regulatory body. We are bound by the legislature. That's what we can do. And that's what you don't want the government stepping outside of its lanes. That's the whole purpose of having a government that is structured and that has those rules like I talked about. So, if there are bigger policy considerations, I get that. And that's the discussion, and we're being hands off. But when it comes to talking about these specific cases or whether you think someone committed fraud, that's not within the purview of this commission.
But if you look at any of this, why wasn't the title company contacted? Why wasn't the seller contacted? Why wasn't the listing
Should
broker
we
that's
even
here
talk
on the?
about any specific case?
I don't believe that it's the enforcement division's job to be proactive police. I believe it is their job to take known fact from a criminal case and apply it to this matrix.
Where are they
That's
supposed to
it.
get it from? Because they're not getting it. Where are they supposed to get that information from?
From the criminal justice. They pull those public
But
records.
they're not pulling it because there's so many cases they didn't pull.
Mike, somebody's convicted of a crime, are y'all not pulling the criminal record?
So things that are convictions will pull. If you're being indicted on different items, like you may plea out on one charge out of being charged with 15 different crimes. We can't use those other 14 ancillary
Correct.
things because we can only use convictions, and that's what we are limited to because that's what the legislature said, convictions, not
And then when you pull those-
arrests, not indictments.
Right.
I think that doesn't have a resolution.
And then when you pull that conviction, it goes into this, for lack of a better term, chapter 53 matrix to determine fitness, right? And that's it.
Correct.
And that's the job. Our job isn't to be a proactive police force.
Okay, so when
We're not
this
retrying- we're not
person goes
retrying
back
cases.
and does something again, all of us can be held liable. And I know at this table, people have said TREC people can't be held liable. I've checked over and over. We can be held liable.
For what?
For
What do we be
if
held
somebody harms somebody else and we know they have the potential to do that harm, we can be held liable.
Okay, we're way off, way off.
Shake your head, Chance. Go talk to attorneys.
We've got a process, we've looked at it. Do we walk on water without floaties? Absolutely not. But do we get them done correctly? I think so. Is there always room for improvement? Absolutely. And I think the 6 additional staff we gave them 2 years ago has certainly lent to that. And they will continue to get better and better. Okay? But I mean, unless there's something more specific, then let's move on.
Fine, shake your head and stand. Not gonna be my problem. But I would like an investigative procedure report.
I have written down, you asked 2 questions. What is the investigative process and how are investigators trained?
And how are they, do they have continuing education? And is there a checklist that the order must contain? And are there checks and balances, not a rubber stamp?
Checklist for orders. And are there checks and balances? Okay. Anything else?
So when it comes, I think what I'm hearing you say is with respect to investigation, whether something was not done that should have been done, right? In, for instance, obtaining testimony from whoever. And so, oftentimes in an investigation, when you have enough, it's enough, right? And there's no need to go pile on more information. So where do you draw the line in obtaining evidence to prosecute whatever rule?
Correct, I get it.
Of TREC, right? And so for us to say, well, you didn't interview person Y and person X and person Z, but Mike could have already gotten the evidence that he needed to prosecute whatever rule.
They didn't.
Then, he has that discretion to, okay, I have enough and I don't need any more. And so I don't know at what point do you say enough's enough with respect to obtaining the evidence? And maybe there's a disconnect, and unless you found something that, hey, this rule was violated and we didn't do anything about it. And is that the case?
We didn't. And I mean, unauthorized practice of law. I mean, there was tons of stuff in that contract that was never even called out. And no, they did not do this case justice. That is us. We do regulate the unauthorized practice of law.
But there's a broad range there. Broad range of authorized practice of law.
Did you look at the special provision?
I did look at the special provisions, and no way would I say that was unauthorized. Anyway, okay.
I
Investigative-
encourage you to go back and look at what I wrote
Yeah.
because
investigative process, how they're trained, continuing education, a checklist, and check and balances.
Mhm.
Okay,
And so what would you like?
we're at this point, we're not putting in the workshop. Get it to executive, get it to the commissioners, and then if they think there's something missing, but we're not gonna workshop it. Not unless it comes back from the commission saying, hey, I mean, it's almost like the call center. If there's things that need to be tweaked, we can certainly tweak it internally, but I don't think there's a reason to workshop it.
not like the call center, people are being harmed.
I meant changing processes and procedures. Okay,
So I just want to make sure we're really clear in what the takeaway is. And that, you know, Mike's team knows what they're supposed to do. I will say, I did not have an indication, and maybe I misheard you, so I did not ask Mike to prepare a presentation because I thought this was going to be something in what you sent us with that presentation and for something for the full commission to discuss, because I think at this point, we're at a policy discussion and therefore, you know, really, I think it makes sense for staff to be a little bit more offhand on this, because this is a, you know, to the extent there's policy considerations, there's policy considerations, and we can receive those. I want to make sure though, so you would like a document that details the investigative process? You want to know whether there's a checklist or
What has to be checked and what needs to be on orders
what needs to be on agreed orders?
Mhm. and what is checked when they are doing their investigative process?
Okay, it's 2 checklists.
And
How are the staff, enforcement staff and investigators trained?
okay,
What is the continuing education?
And then checks and balances, like who within the enforcement division
Mhm.
checks the work of others.
and then you would like for us to send, to provide that to the executive committee first? And then it'll come back to workshop in February?
I think it goes to commissioners. And
It's
then
just-
we'll,
It's just a piece of
that's a
information.
piece of information, and then if we need to workshop, we will.
Okay.
I have another question of why are licenses reissued when they check yes to background check and the background hasn't been checked? So for instance, somebody filed for renewal on 1/17. TREC renewed the license on 4/5. TREC filed an internal complaint on 4/8. TREC requested information on 4/15 and 4/30. On September 19th, 5 months later, there was a final order. As of today, the person still has a license, which is over 30 days.
Again, I don't know that anyone can speak to a specific scenario without,
But it happens all the time. Before a background, somebody checks yes, license is renewed, and that goes down the process. While they still checked yes, nothing's been done. So if you look at one of the cases today, the respondent stated, he sent the email to the commission, separate from the background form that explained the criminal history. He also self-reported his conviction to the commission. He had been, he self-reported conviction. They let him continue to use his license and even renew it despite this knowledge until he was sentenced.
So.
See, but
Is the renewal automatic without regard? Like if they check yes, it's automatic, right? So you gotta let it go through the due process.
Correct, because if they violate the law, then we have to go through their due process,
Right.
allowing them
So
to
you got
opening
an
up a
So why
complaint.
don't you wait to renew?
Huh?
So why don't you wait to renew if they check that? If you have the information you
You
need.
gotta go
You hold off their renewal until we do the whole judicial process?
I mean, at least know what you're looking at. I mean, he just.
Are you not allowed to do that?
you're effectively taking away a license, at least in the
You
interim.
gotta give them the due process first, and then you do whatever.
all right,
So that was 5 months.
we're up.
It can take process, it can take time. Let's see.
You,
It
They
can
have
speak
right.
on a case by case basis.
have rights, Leslie. I mean, you
No,
can't.
I get that, but 5 months, they said they have a background.
It takes what it takes. It's not like,
Okay.
it's not like a Lisa. or a
Okay.
company and you-
All right, we're gonna move on. We also had some discussion on DBA. Executive met with staff to review the practice related to DBAs. We're confident in the process. I mean, you turn it in, you certify it. I mean, I don't know if we are in the position to have a full-time staff person check nothing but DBAs. And so this was certainly discussed at executive and certainly and assumed name. We just did an assumed name. Let's do the process. You know, I think it's a good process. Okay.
Hold on, please. A DBA is a legal word.
Mhm.
Our TREC staff says it only regulates DBAs in terms of advertising. So when TREC enforcement looks at DBAs, it is really only in that context. That doesn't mean there aren't things license holders do with DBAs and LLCs that might seem confusing or unnecessary, but when it comes to regulation, TREC regulation of DBAs is about advertising. It does not require a DBA to be registered with the Secretary of State. If that is the case, it should not be called a DBA on our website. DBA is a TREC registered name or whatever, but a DBA is a legal name.
And business entities have the DBAs that are registered with the Secretary of State.
But
And you sign an affidavit saying, and then you send a
Yeah,
copy. And then when you renew, you sign an affidavit saying you still own more than 10% of that DBA.
that's not what's happening on our website.
On the renewal for business entities, that is happening.
But I'm not talking about a business entity. I'm talking about DBA.
Okay.
Well, a DBA isn't a
So-
name for a business.
Right, but on our website, it'll give a business name and then it'll give a DBA and people are writing whatever they want in there as a DBA. And TREC does not check that. So we are deceiving people that are looking at our website because it's not a true
But
DBA.
see, I don't think we're deceiving because if my name is Scott and I'm doing business as Sparky, I'm on my license, it says doing business as. I mean, and to me, that is a whole lot more transparent than also known as or an alternate name. I think the DBA is letting the consumer know they do business as this name also.
So if you have this false DBA on our website and you accept commission under that false DBA.
No, see, that's a totally different thing. The only way you can accept compensation is under an LLC. It cannot be on our website. It's only between TREC and the broker issuing that compensation. If you're receiving commission through the business registration LLC, you cannot advertise that as an LLC on our website. It's only between, am I correct on that?
Yeah, so a business entity to accept compensation would either need to be licensed, and then they would be able to engage in all types of brokerage activity, or registered, in which they could not engage in any other brokerage activity except accepting
compensation. So I could put Sparky, but Sparky LLC, I could not. The only time that is done is when Chance is giving me compensation.
I mean, I get what
With it being
I
registered.
understand what you're saying about the legal difference between a DBA and just saying I'm doing business as Sparky. I totally 100% get it. And it is,
It's deceptive.
I wouldn't use the word deceptive, but I would use the word, we're kind of playing to the lowest common denominator in some sense of the word.
But I think the
But I
consumer
think it-
recognizes DBA versus alternate name or
I'd rather it be
assumed.
published than
DBA is a legal name. You're deceiving them. If it's not a DBA, then it doesn't need to be labeled DBA. Whether the consumer is getting it, I doubt it. I'm playing to the lowest common denominator. They don't get it.
So somebody could be out there operating, let's say with, I guess the risk is not knowing that there's an entity operating doing real estate brokerage, right? And so the risk is having an entity that's not registered, right? An unlicensed entity where they didn't put it on there.
It's going on all the time.
And so how do we fix that? I mean, other than your annual renewal, when you say, is all the information correct? When you renew your brokerage information, if they didn't fill it in, then, and they're working under a DBA, then if somebody has a complaint and they look up the DBA and they can't find it on the TREC website, then yeah, that's a problem. So how do you enforce that unless you had a complaint, right? So the risk is not having it on the TREC website, right? Not that it's on the website and that it's wrong.
This is for the team and group registration.
Yeah.
Correct? So if I have 10 teams under me and you look at my brokerage and those 10 teams are under me, they're listed as a DBA doing business as.
Teams are listed under team names.
But under the license, it's everything.
Right.
It's-
So there's DBA and then team names. There's different sections.
But there is DBAs. Okay.
It says DBA and then it says team.
So your problem is DBA
It's not
doing
really a
business as. In order for them to use that, they should have a formal DBA, not just doing
It needs
business
to be
as.
registered.
Okay.
Right, and so when, we asked them, you have the legal right to use this. I think to Commissioner Pena's point, and I think you were quoting an email I sent, it's the correlation of someone is trying to find who that DBA is tied to
Registered to the TREC.
so that they can get the answers to their questions. And that's why I talk about advertising. It's to make that connection. And that's where we're regulating, is in the advertising and the connection. We're not the Secretary of State.
I don't think
They have a-
legally registered DBA really has anything to do with it. If somebody's using an assumed name out there, whether registered or not, I want to be able to tie that DBA or that assumed name
To the broker.
to the broker.
Yeah, from
to
a
the licensed
consumer
broker, whether it's
standpoint, that's what you
registered or
want.
not with the state or with the county. It doesn't
Should you
matter.
call it a DBA when it's really not?
I think that's,
Assumed
I think
name
that's,
DBA.
That's the question.
I think that's the question, because I mean, let's not wrong, DBA is it's a legal thing.
If you're operating under XYZ Realty, or that's a bad example, ABC Realty, then I want to be able to look up ABC, that's probably bad. You know what I mean, right? Then I look it up at the TREC, and it pops up a broker with a license.
But there's-
Then
there
I
could
can
be-
file a complaint against. that.
There could be 10 people with that same name.
We can't control that.
Well, there could be.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
you know
I'm
how many
just saying.
hometown realty teams there are?
Right, but
Okay.
that's a team name, yes, but
Because you can register
But
with the county.
DBA
so
is
it's-
a
You
legal
cannot register.
term, and we're not using it in the legal way.
All right. It's gonna be fun. Future workshop items. 25,
DBA is.
DBAs. Alternate name, although doing business as, and what's the other one?
It's a valid point.
Assumed name.
It's a valid point.
Okay.
And if you don't have, if I can't tie that assumed name, registered or not, to a license, then we've got a problem.
Well, we will put it on, but I will tell you.
But we need more,
Yeah.
like what do you want from our staff on DBAs?
I mean, I guess my question on this is, at the end of the day, unless and until somebody files a complaint.
Right.
What the hell difference does it make?
Right.
But my biggest concern is they can find the sponsor, they can find the responsible broker now. And that,
You've got to find the responsible
Right.
broker.
Yes. Yes.
And you have to have an assumed name.
I mean, unless we just change the way it's
You have to
labeled.
file it
Correct. And it's
every
not-
10 years.
Right, exactly, and it's not checked.
okay. All right, DBA, anything else in February?
Yes, but I think staff is asking.
Yeah, so,
Like, how can we help
well,
you?
right, because
Yeah,
we brought this
like
issue,
how?
we brought this issue to the executive
We were
committee.
fine with the process.
They did a
There's
big,
nothing
a
to
deep
do
dive.
Because you
Yeah.
can't, like Chad said, you can't do anything other
Yeah.
than handle the complaints. Now, if we're getting complaints about people having a DBA and we can't go find them, then that's a problem.
That's enforcement.
That's enforcement, and we got a problem. And is that happening? That's my question.
No.
Yeah.
The
So-
complaints.
There's nothing to fix. I mean, you catch them by people, hey, this guy has, 123 Realty and I can't find him on the website. Well,
We
then
do check it as part of the investigative process. If we notice a name, we go and make sure at least it's registered in the TREC, excuse me, on the TREC website. And if we see it on the, since we have that new method for the advertising compliance, part of our questions are now is, please provide us the documentation that you re-registered. Takes a complaint in order to ask that question.
So that is-
At least for enforcement side, but we are actively,
But
since we implemented that, we are asking.
In my opinion, the documentation secondary.
But they're asking it on the advertising.
Yeah, it's
ballot.
very important that we get that.
And at the end of the day, if the data's not there to support a solution, there's no problem.
But you're getting that, like up front, we send that in, right? I mean, we send in our registered name stuff and all, so that, and it has to be renewed. Now, we've got it in different counties, and I don't know what all, but it's with the Secretary of State. Well, anyway.
Well, now there's somebody who may know better than me, like a county clerk in the room. I think that there was legislation passed in 21 that you don't have to register in all the different counties as long as it's registered at the SOS.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Correct.
I think you're right. We put.
All right. We have nothing for February currently. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, the calendar.
The calendar.
February 5th, 11th. May 5th and 6th.
Doing Cinco de Mayo in San Antonio for.
And
Oh, that is,
we need to stay more fluid on May until we,
Right.
fluid is
It'll be a lot of.
said. We're still looking at venues for the May meeting, and that might pretty much dictate when that meeting is. Is that fair, Renata? Okay.
Arello had a meeting in San Antonio about 4 years ago at a little hotel that was.
That one's on our list.
Yeah, that was pretty.
And we're looking further out, we're looking off of the Riverwalk so that license holders can come and not pay like $1 million for parking. It's about $50 a day for parking at the Riverwalk. Yes, so we're trying to kind of look a little beyond.
That'd be fun.
Everybody got to have
I've
those
seen
dates.
the Riverwalk.
Stick in the river.
Yeah.
Feel good.
August and November look great to me.
Yeah,
You may be here.
You're open? We are adjourned.
Thank you. There we go.
Well done, ladies.